And she graduated from Texas State University in 2011 with her Master's of Education. She came to Veritas as quickly as she could for the 2011-2012 school year, where she taught third grade. Since then, she has also taught fourth grade as well and has served in administration. Hannah and her husband, Philip, dated through high school, married in 2010, and have three children, Eli, 13, Lottie, 11, and Wesley, 8. Together, they attend the Austin Stone Community Church and love to run away to the mountains of New Mexico as often as they can. Their favorite book to read together is still being debated. Hannah has a deep appreciation for the classical model and the rich, cohesive view of the world and God's story it presents to the students. Welcome, Hannah. Thank you.
Well, thank y'all. It's really nice to get to be here today and spend a little time with you. Like Sonia said, I've been a part of Veritas since 2011. It was my second job out of college. Ellen Schutnick, who I think you got to hear from yesterday, I attended church with her, and so she invited me to come check Veritas out and see what was going on there, and we have not left. Well, that's technically a lie. We did leave for 2 years. We moved away to be closer to our family. We homeschooled during that time, which was lovely, but I was so thankful when God released us to finally come back to Veritas. And so we've been back now for going into our 5th year. I will have a 7th grader, a 6th grader, and a 3rd grader this year. So we're excited for the year ahead. I don't know what your school at home space looks like right now, but mine is just a table mounted with uniforms and curriculum and folders that need organization, which will happen this weekend. So school starts for us on Monday. All right, well, let me begin just by praying for us first, and then we will jump into this session, which is just all about naming some classical practices that may be new to you if you are new to the classical tradition. So would you bow your heads with me, please? Lord God, you are so good, and we're so thankful that you are. I thank you so much for the opportunity today to come together as parents and co-teachers and teachers and just study this idea of classical education. Lord, I pray that you would be with all of these parents as they look forward to the school year ahead and the children that they are thinking of. And God, I pray that today they would walk out of here just feeling a little bit more equipped to do this big job that you have called them to. Amen. All right, so classical education, what have you heard? What does it mean to be classically educated? You can just throw some things out. You didn't know there was participation involved today. Taught how to think. Mm-hmm. Read the great books, how to reason. What else have you heard? Lots of terms floating around out there. Anything else? No pop culture. Mm-hmm. No tech. No tech. Virtue, beauty, wisdom.
Nature study.
Nature. Mm-hmm. Okay. A lot of things. We could keep going. I have others percolating in my mind as well. This is a wide and vast topic. I have spent like all of my educational career in classical education, and I am still learning about it. Today, I'm going to use 2 different metaphors to try to explain what I believe we are trying to do in classical education. I'm going to start with one, and I'm going to close with one. And the first one that I want to start with is classical education as a hike. So like I said in my little bio, we love to go to New Mexico, and we are now at a point where we can call it a hike. We had to call it long walks, or the 8-year-old wouldn't go. We can now call it a hike. He's growing in his ability to hike. But hiking encompasses both an end result. So there is somewhere that we want our students to be at the end of their educational career. But a hike also involves a path. A true hiker would not make plans to be helicoptered up to the top of the mountain and just fall down. You would call that a cool stunt perhaps, but that would not actually be a hike. The path we take matters. Right now, our family, we take long meandering hikes. We enjoy wildflowers, we enjoy the water. It's a slow ascent. Just this summer, actually, my 13-year-old said to me, "Someday I want to finish a hike. because we have yet to actually finish a hike. Our stage of hiking is that we explore as far as we can. When they start to get tired, we might stop for a snack and go a little bit more. We might push a little bit past our frustration level, and then we turn around and we head back home. But each year, we can go a little bit further. And classical education is similar to me. We care about where our students end up. We want to raise men and women of virtue. We want to raise men and women who can speak well and winsomely. We want them to read the great books. We want them to be able to converse with those ancient authors and then rightly implement or not what the characters of those books did or did not do. So we do care about where these kids wind up, but we also care about how they get there. And of course, this is somewhat self-explanatory. You can't rightly get to a place without first having a path to it. But I would argue that hikers choose a path that prepares them to appreciate their destination. Some may choose the scenic route, filled with waterfalls, wildflowers, a certain tree type, or animals or birds that they might like to see. Others might choose a hike filled with hardships and obstacles, a good incline, boulders that need to be climbed over, fallen trees, creeks that need to be waded through. The path is chosen in order that a hiker can rightly appreciate where they wind up. And I see that classical education, especially at the grammar stage, is very much the same. Classical education in grammar school should be a lovely, meandering walk, filled with beauty, lots of wildflower and waterfall moments. However, we do want the difficulty to slightly increase each year. The incline should get steeper. You may encounter some uncleared paths. It is both a process and a product. And we can certainly understand this on a macro level, but it works on a micro level too. I remember early on as both a teacher, and then I've experienced it even more as a co-teacher of my own students, this temptation to view education as whatever output a student can produce. And if a student can produce an output, if we can finish that worksheet, if we can write that narration, if we can check that book off our list, I feel quite accomplished in thinking, we have learned and we are becoming who we want to be. And while output does matter, there's so much in a classical education that is not output focused. There's a lot happening, I'll tell them, between your ears that maybe we're not going to see on paper. Let's resist this temptation, and let's try to understand some of these classical practices that really do just take place between the students' ears. Hopefully they have two. Practices regarding language. You've probably heard that classical education is very heavy in language. We read together as a faculty 2 years ago the liberal arts tradition, which is a wonderful read. It is one that I will have to return to and read multiple times because there was a lot packed into it. But there was this particular phrase that lots of us in grammar school latched onto, and the authors posited that in grammar stage, we need to make children at home in language. And so this has been something that's been on the forefront of our minds, and we've been looking for opportunities to do this better and better. And so lots of the practices that you may be employing this next year are going to regard language. So one is the art of imitation. Any of you heard that as associated with classical education? Isn't this a really cute, this little guy here following his dad and whoever this other man is? I think that's so cute. Classical education seeks to employ the art of imitation. You can think of the master and the apprentice right here. You can also think of Paul in 1 Corinthians when he invites his readers to follow me as I follow Christ. Maybe you can't totally picture what it would be like to be like Jesus, but I'll keep my eye on Christ. You keep your eye on me and you follow me. This is a really helpful metaphor, really, in talking to our children, about anything. Mom and dad, we've got our eyes on Christ. You follow us. We're going to train you in the habits of following Christ. But we use imitation specifically with elements of language. And so let's examine a few of those. One is memorization. You will probably be memorizing a lot of things here in your next couple of years in the grammar stage at a classical school. And how many of you are feeling a little trepidation about needing to memorize things? Anyone nervous about those things? As adults, we tend to feel that way. A little bit, that muscle may have atrophied in our brain. I know my mom loves to tell my kids, I just can't memorize. And I want to tell her, well, that's not entirely true. Maybe it's harder for you now, but it's not as hard for our children as it often feels for us. So I want to encourage you, if you're feeling a little bit nervous about that, know what you're doing here, know what you're going to be providing them in pursuing this, and just learn alongside them and be joyful alongside them as you seek to memorize these things. Because if we want our students to speak well, it makes sense that their minds must be filled with accurate and beautiful language. So Ecclesiastes 1:9 tells us there is nothing new under the sun. Yet Genesis 1:26 and 27 tells us that we are created in the image of God. Another way to think about this is that being created in the image of God, the ultimate creator, means that we get to participate in creation too. I've used the term co-creators with God, but Tolkien talks about how we as people, we are sub-creators. We fall under the supremacy of Christ, and we get to create with the things that he has already created. The medieval world, which we will often look to in classical education, saw memory, the act of memory, as an art of creation. So we have recitatio and memoria. Recitatio is the idea of the memorization of facts or words. It's a storing up. And then memoria is recreation from what has been memorized. Know that as you are helping your children to memorize these things, whether it is scripture or your history timeline or beautiful poems, you are providing them with the fodder to go be sub-creators. And we are just rearranging the good gifts that God has already given us. You can think of 2 piano sonatas. There are the basics on a piano. It's all the same keys, it's all the same chords, just made in different arrangements. But you could compare 2 piano sonatas and they would not sound exactly the same. We can also look to Mary's song in Luke 1:47, after she finds out that she is going to give birth to the Christ child and she meets her cousin. She sings and I always say this wrong, the Magnificat, I think is how you say it. That is a recreation of what Hannah sang after finding out about the birth of her child. Mary knew her Bible, she knew her Old Testament, and then she pulled from that and she was able to recreate things and rightly glorify God. By participating in the recitatio, by helping our students to store up beautiful language, we can more fully participate in our imago Dei, our image of God. We get to then go and create with the beautiful things that we have stored up. Same thing with timelines. If you're going to memorize any history pegs or timelines, or maybe we have Bible flashcards where they're events of the Bible, or some of you may be memorizing your presidents or your states and capitals. Those are easy things to think, we have to do our memory. And you've probably heard about that evil rote memory out there that we're just really not supposed to do. Don't fall for it. It's beautiful and it's wonderful. A learned person is one who makes connections. This is from David Hicks's Norms and Nobility. And timelines, an understanding of timelines, is really helpful in this. Just 2 weeks ago, I got to use this with my middle daughter. She's going into 6th grade. She's completing her reading for the summer. She's reading The Witch of Blackbird Pond. So we've been taking turns reading it to each other, and she's reading some to herself. She reads something to me, or maybe I'm reading to her, something about Connecticut, and she knows Connecticut because she has memorized her states and capitals, but then something about the King of England. And immediately she pauses and says, something wasn't adding up in her brain. Why does Connecticut still owe any sort of allegiance to the king? Guess what we went back to? Her history pegs. And the one event that stuck in her mind is, wait, is this before or after World War II? And I said, this is long before World War II, long before even the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, and we named all these things. But we were able to go back to her history pegs, and she was able then to rightly position herself in the story she was reading, which allowed her to comprehend much better. Understand history. As you are studying your history, understand this as telling the truth to your children. There are lots of cool memory techniques. If memory is something that feels a little bit dry to you at home, I'd encourage you just to get on the Google and look up cool memory techniques. There are certain bracelets you can make with knots in them that kind of, remind you of certain events, or you could do it with beads. I always tried to put movement to our memory. And how many of you have heard of the Memory Palace? Is that familiar? There's my friends back there have. That doesn't count. There's a really neat book called Moonwalking with Einstein, in which I think he's like a social scientist, but he explains how he's used the Memory Palace to memorize a lot of things. And our seniors walk through for their senior thesis presentation. That's how they memorize it. Now, I know your young grammar school children won't be presenting a thesis just yet, but I would work on scripture memory with my kids in the backyard, and we would time our scripture, or we would time our verses to certain movements. So as you say verse 1, you walk to the trampoline. After the trampoline, you walk over to the peach tree and you say verse 2. While you're at the peach tree, climb the peach tree and say verse 3, climb down for verse 4. There are some really fun ways that you can bring joy and life to something that might feel a little bit dry. But just know that you're giving them really good, beautiful things when you pursue memorization. Memory crafts the self. Think of Philippians 4:8. And now, my dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. So to raise men and women of virtue, we must first memorize those things which are virtuous. Let me get some water real quick. All right, so memorization. This one, the only output really required is when your kiddos are giving you back the words that they've memorized. Now we're going to move into some practices of language that actually involve writing, which those are probably the easiest ones just to think, just get it on paper and we can say that it's done. And I really want to encourage you not to do that. Copy work. How many of you have heard of copy work? Okay. Copy work is very similar to memorization. This is a storing up. We are giving our children good words for them to store up, but it's in written form. And this is really the beginning of good writing instruction. Think about how writing involves both ideas and structure. And the goal for a grammar stage student is to first learn the structure. Remember, recitatio, the storing up, the practicing of things being done right and well, must come before a student can reproduce something, which is the memoria. So let's first give them the good and right things with which to work before we're expecting them to create something on their own. Copy work allows a student to grow in stamina in regards to using the pencil as they work with a master writer's words. We have a really fun project in first grade. This is my son Wesley's. He's, like I say, he's going into third grade, so this is a couple years ago. But we have a project it's our Author Spotlight Project. And so all of our first graders choose an author from a selected list, because these are authors that we think they've mastered their craft of writing. They have good words to share with us. So they choose an author, and then each month their family is responsible for finding one of those authors' books, reading it together and enjoying it, choosing a handful of sentences to copy, and then they illustrate it. My son and I enjoyed this so much, and he actually enjoyed it too. I know I would enjoy it as a mom, but he really enjoyed it too. And one of the books we read had in it an onomatopoeia. Y'all know what an onomatopoeia is? A sound word. And so as we're reading, I stop and I say, oh, Wes, this is an onomatopoeia. This is a sound word. Now, wouldn't you know what he finds all the time? Not only in his own reading, but he hears them and he comes back to me and he says, Mom, it was another onomatopoeia. So now we're building this little relationship here over onomatopoeias. But we also got to have a really lovely conversation about honoring a master writer. He studied Jerry Pinkney, who's also a master watercolorist. And so our project even took on, we would read, we would visualize the language that Jerry Pinkney was using. I remember sitting down with him at one point and he was going to get started on his copying, and I reminded him, I'm right here with an eraser. Do you know why I'm here with an eraser? And he said, well, if I make a mistake, you're going to stop. And I said, yes, because these are not our words. These are Jerry Pinkney's words, and we need to treat them carefully and well. It elevated this copy work practice that we were doing. So he wrote the words, and then, like I said, our project took on this really cool extra element that because Jerry Pinkney was a master watercolorist, Wesley decided he wanted to watercolor his illustrations. The first one he tried to do his own, and he wasn't real satisfied with it. And so thankfully, my husband is far more artistically gifted than I am. So Wes and I would work together on the words, and then Wes would sit with Dad with the book open, and they would choose an illustration that then he imitated the illustration. And so this is from the peacock's tail, and you can see his little peacock there. This was a really sweet project, and it was a really fun bonding experience for the three of us, and it was all centered around copy work. The idea of copy work is that we're going to practice the correct structure and form of language without anyone needing to create it themselves. As you're working on your copy work, point out to your student whatever you can. Point out the punctuation, the word types. If you're studying grammar and you're starting to understand what the difference between a noun and a verb, stop and talk about the difference between the nouns and verbs that the author has provided. You can point out spelling patterns. Oh, this is another way to spell that long A sound. This word uses AI as opposed to a final silent E. Don't do this to exhaust the student. We're not expecting mastery and memorization of all of those things, but really just to delight and be enchanted by what the language provides. So, copywork's one of my favorite things. It's just one of the sweetest. You have so many little opportunities, little things to point out to them and orient them towards. There's no over-explaining necessary. Just create these little dabs, these little pegs that will live in their minds that you can come back to regularly. After copy work comes the idea of dictation. So see, we're kind of building on these stair steps. We're working on memorization. We're filling our minds with beautiful words and language patterns. We've moved into copy work, where now we're taking what's in our minds, taking a good example from a master writer, and adding the writing element. Dictation is the combination of these two things. It's the combination of copy work plus memorization. It's the same idea as copy work, but the students are going to see a well-written sentence or group of sentences. You are going to discuss all those things. If an onomatopoeia is present, point it out. If an interesting piece of punctuation is there, show it to them, name it for them. They may not know exactly why that apostrophe is necessary, but you can point it out to them and show them that it is there. So you look at this good piece of writing, and then you and your student work to commit it to memory. You take away the example, and then they go write and they recreate it. Dictation happens typically around 3rd or 4th grade. So you won't be doing that with your younger students just yet, but it's building towards dictation. And this is the idea that after writing correct sentences for a long enough time, hopefully we pass them on up, not the food chain, but pass them all up the school chain to where they're writing their own compositions and they're not bogged down by the structure of the language anymore. Then they're more able to focus on the ideas that they're wanting to capture and put in writing. Okay, next I'll talk just a little bit about reading aloud. Amanda and I get to talk about this a lot more this afternoon, so I'm going to skip over part of this presentation, but I just want to encourage you that reading is not something just to check off your list. The same is true for early readers as they are struggling through decoding those phonograms, and your heart rate might be rising a little bit because it's feeling a little bit painful. Just be patient and take deep breaths and sit with them. I was talking to a mom just the other day who has a struggling reader, and she says, I've learned to fold laundry while he's reading to me because that gives her something else to focus on and to do. So find some strategies like that. Reading good stories together, please do this forever. Fill students' heads with worthy words. We read The Wind in the Willows a handful, was it just last year, I guess, that we read it? Have any of you read Wind in the Willows? It's a book that I often had to put down and retell my kids what was happening because the language was so floral almost. And we just enjoyed it. I wasn't terribly worried about whether they remembered all the small details, but I knew there were some beautiful words that they were going to hear that then maybe I could try to use in our everyday speech that we could share together. Reading aloud transports students in time and allows them to make connections. Nestle your reading in your history pegs. Love of reading now translates to an ability to read the greats later on and to participate in that great conversation. It provides virtuous examples, fairy tales especially. And again, this is one of those things that sometimes as adults, we read a fairy tale and we want to point out to them all of the themes and the connections. And did you see Jesus in there? And did you see that this is this? If you've got a kid who likes to do that, go for it. But if not, just let them enjoy the stories. I remember, loving Christmas songs growing up, like listening to them on the radio. And it wasn't until I was about 25 that I started really listening to the words of the Christmas hymns and realizing how beautiful and impactful they were. Fairy tales are the same way to me. Let them enjoy them on whatever level they enjoy them on, and that meaning, that will come to them as they grow. And then, of course, reading together builds strong families. Amanda and I will talk a little bit more about that today. Okay, so then we also have an idea of narration. Narration, there are kind of two types, and I'm not exactly sure which one your school is going to be practicing. We at Veritas over the last several years have realized, we should be practicing both. So we're looking for more and more opportunities for both. And as the parents in your home, there are lots of opportunities, especially for oral narration. And that is simply a telling back. And honestly, your kids are already probably really good at it when they tell you what they did on their day. And they are just talking, and you are just listening, and you are nodding. That is narration. So there's oral narration, which Charlotte Mason was a late 19th, early 20th century British educator, and she really advocated for students participating in oral narration. And in an oral narration, you want to have your student recall as many details as possible. This is typically done about reading, but it can happen just, in a normal course of a day. But have them recall for you as many details as possible. What this is doing is building in them the habit of attention. So if at the end of reading, your child knows, okay, mom and dad are going to expect me to be able to tell them many, many details about what we just read, they will, over the course of time, really begin to focus their attention on the story that you are reading to them. And I'd encourage you, know your child. Some kiddos can do this with an entire chapter. Some kiddos need you to stop at the end of one page. And so this will take a little bit of trial and error, and that's okay. But encourage accurate, specific, and detailed language. How many of your kiddos right now will tell you about this and that without ever actually naming it? Does that happen at your house too? It happens at my house a lot, and I have to stop them and say, you need to identify the antecedent to your pronoun before you use it, please, because I don't know what we're talking about. My kids love that I'm a teacher too. That's oral narration. Just having them talk using accurate and specific language, recalling as many details as you possibly can. Oops, sorry. Then there's also written narration. This comes from someone named Susan Weisbauer, who is big in the classical world. Several years ago, she wrote some curriculum and some books. And this is the idea of taking the details and ideas from something that's been read, and then a student rewriting it. And this is that act of memoria. So the goal is to really move from more oral narrations to the written narration. And again, solid written narrations, that's probably not going to happen real well until like third or fourth grade. For us, in first and second grade, our students are writing narrations, but they're heavily led by the classroom teacher or the co-teacher. And it's always preceded by a strong oral narration. So retell to me what we just read. Perhaps I, as the teacher, need to ask you a few prompting questions. We're going to work to orally put those into complete sentences. And then, lo and behold, you actually have just verbalized your written narration, and then you put the pen to paper and you write it down. moving from language now just to a few things that can easily feel very tedious, and you might think, why is this worth doing? Handwriting and math facts. It's not everyone's favorite part of the day, mine included. Math facts as a child used to terrify me. How many of you had to do the 100-page in one, or the 100 math facts in 1 minute? Do y'all have that? Still makes me nervous. But we can encourage our students through this, that the memorization of these things shows that there is a proper form and a rhythm to things. We serve a God of order. And correctly writing my letters reminds me that God does have a plan for these things. 1 Corinthians 14:40, all things should be done decently and with order. And then I also want to talk about the idea of review. When you have that review week where it says, go back over this thing, or if you have, an end of chapter review, some of those things can feel really tedious and maybe even easy to skip because you think, well, I've already taught it and my kids showed me that they'd mastered it. But I'd really encourage you to come back to this idea of a hike. Review is like the idea of switchbacks on a hike. So whether it's your math and you're at an end of review, our math curriculum, every day the students have to complete, every home day, they complete what's called a mixed practice, which is 10 to, if you're in fourth grade, 30 problems. That's what's called a spiral review. And so it's just any sort of problem, any sort of math problem that you've been taught. And it is daunting to some of them. Math facts, your phonograms, going over your phonogram cards might feel very, very tedious. And it might be really easy to say, they've got it, let's not do this anymore. Or your spelling rules. But I'd really encourage you not to. Again, think of, these are those switchbacks. You're covering ground as you're making your way to your destination. But an occasional switchback allows your child to do the walking and own the journey rather than just you pushing them up the mountain, which is not what we want education to be. It's about what's forming in them. And their bodies and their minds are a little bit smaller, and they may need some back and forth switchbacks. There's a really lovely quote by G.K. Chesterton. He says, if you leave a thing alone, you leave it to a torrent of change. So think, there might be a day where your child shows absolute mastery of all their phonograms, and you put the cards at the back of the cabinet and don't pull them out. But leaving them alone leaves it to a torrent of change. If you leave a white post alone, it will soon be a black post. If you particularly want it to be white, you must always be painting it again. So allowing for those review sessions, as tedious as they may feel, keeps in front of your child's mind what we want to be in front of their mind. All right, so now time for my last metaphor for classical education. Any one thing that we've discussed today is really quite insignificant on its own. Often in these practices, you are going to be tempted to say, I am tempted to say, what is the point of this? It feels tedious. It feels too repetitive. Your kids might think it's boring. We might be enjoying the flowers and the trickling of the creek, but is my kid actually progressing up this path? Will we ever make it to our destination? And in those moments, I'd like for you to think about an impressionist painting. If you notice, that was the beginning of our slideshow here. There are some qualities of impressionist painting that I think are really helpful to what the grammar stage feels like in classical education. One, an impressionist painting is known for broken color. It's those small little dabs and strokes that appear insignificant up close. But when you pull back and they blend together, what do you see? Bless you. What the artist intended, right? Up close, some of those home days at home, or even some of your moments in the classroom, it will feel like these little dabs that don't really look like much. But put together over several years, as you zoom out, because remember, we're trying to build a whole person here, they are significant. You can also keep in mind Impressionist paintings are known for the wet-on-wet technique. There will be times when you are applying another dab or another skill on top of wet paint, a skill that feels a little shaky. This tends to happen for us in third grade math. We start building on long division very quickly, and the kiddos feel nervous, and then our co-teachers feel nervous. Remember, this is okay. It's a part of the technique. And then lastly, I would just encourage you to focus on the light. Impressionist paintings are known for being able to capture light. Keep that your focus as you train your children in the way they should go. Focus on the light. Focus on Christ. Steep your homeschooling in each practice that you participate in with your student. Steep it in prayer. Cover it in prayer. Every morning, when something's going a little bit off the rails, stop and pray. And so you have these little moments here that feel really insignificant, but over the course of several years, you get your painting at the end, which is our whole little, well, I guess they're bigger by that point, human being, going off to do their next thing. And you spent so much time together, you're probably friends and confidants. And isn't that really what we all want with our kiddos? Okay. I can pass it off to the next person. I can pray. I can do questions, whatever. What do you think? Perfect. Do you guys have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
On the day when it feels like you're doing a little dab in the impressionist painting and how do you make sure you regulate your emotions and get the kids' work done and keep your peaceful demeanor?
Yes. It is fascinating how much I'm the primary co-teacher, so mom's emotions taint things. And so I have learned to take lots of walks when I need to. And I think that's probably my best piece of advice is to get a little perspective yourself, to stop in the middle of whatever's feeling difficult, to stop and put it down, tell that child, Mom needs 2 minutes. And have a plan in place for yourself. Like, let's just go ahead and expect that it's probably going to happen, especially if you're co-teaching more than one child. There will be an overwhelming moment. And so just have a plan in place. So whatever it is that in a normal course of life regulates your emotions, whether it's another sip of coffee or taking a walk, or there's a certain scripture to pray, or I'm blessed that my husband works from home, and so I can go into his office and I can say all the things I need to say and then turn around and, go back to co-teaching. So I would just encourage you to have a plan in place, and when you get to that point, you stop, enact that plan, and then you just try it again. Did you have a question too?
This is until third. I have a third grader.
I will too.
Wesley is my.
Oh, yeah.
But we have not done classical education at this point. So, he hasn't done the memorization. He hasn't done the copy work. How are we going to jump right into dictation? All the things he's not ready.
Okay, that's a great question. And so one, I would encourage you, so you're probably familiar with the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And remember that every course of study has its own grammar. And so we have for our own ease, we've said everyone fits into these nice, tidy boxes, and that's just not necessarily the case. So there's certainly room for your third grader to catch up to those things. I always taught third and fourth grade, and I would have new students every year who were new to classical education. They caught up just fine. I think what I'd encourage you to do is obviously work with your classroom teachers and administrators to make sure that this is permissible, but there's no reason why you can't turn a dictation into a copy work if you need to start there. Does that make sense? And so honestly, with dictation, I still, in my classroom and with my own children at home, we look at it together. So they get to see it. And then I will slowly, I've done it before, I'll write it on a whiteboard and I'll take away a word or two at a time, just kind of erase it. And they're practicing then memorizing it. So they're filling that word in. I think you'd be surprised at how quickly he will actually catch up with it. And with narration, do a solid oral narration first and talk. And I will say to my Wesley, we'll form a sentence orally and I'll say, oh, that's a really good one. And I really like that verb. We're going to make sure that this is one of the ones that we write down. So you bridge your oral narration into your written narration, and the things that are coming out of your mouth, you then just have them write down. And there's also lots of opportunities in grammar school to share the pen. That's what I call it. Like if you see that your kiddo's getting bogged down with the actual physical act of writing, go ahead and pick up the pencil and say, hey, way to get one sentence down. I'll do the next two. And that's where I would just work closely with your teacher. I've always, if I ever do that, I use another color pen to show my classroom teacher, Mom wrote that one. And then I always tell my classroom teacher, if you see he's capable of doing this in the classroom and he's trying to pull the wool over my eyes at home, will you please let me know? And I will stop stepping in to support him. But I think that's the idea. And even as a classroom teacher, when I was first in the classroom, the curriculum we used, the dictations were really tough. Amanda, do you remember? Like writing with these level 3 and 4, they were multiple sentences long. It was really, really tough. And so we just, as a school, decided we're going to step in and we're going to support the students as much as we can for them to be successful, always with the idea that I, as the classroom teacher or co-teacher, will begin removing those supports when I see they're no longer necessary. Does that kind of make sense? And all of that, you just pray and you ask the Holy Spirit to show you, yes, help, or no, he can do it. Well, thank y'all.